Thank you.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining Texas Folklife's Folk and Traditional Arts Roundtable series. Tonight we have a great panel of experts on the traditional music genre of Conjunto, which is an art form born in Texas. Some of you may have seen our last panel discussion on Texas accordion music sustainability. And this is kind of an ongoing discussion specifically on the genre of Conjunto. So we have many genres of accordion music here in Texas. And tonight we're going to really dig into the history and the future of Conjunto music. And my name is Sarah Rucker. I am the program director for Texas Folklife's Big Squeeze Accordion Contest. And we just concluded our 14th season of that contest. And we're able to share with you our winners online. And so thank you all for that. I have had the great honor of working with all of our panelists today throughout my time with Texas Folklife and the Big Squeeze, and to learn more about the history of Conjunto and the beautiful communities around the state that are helping to preserve and promote the music. I myself was not born into the tradition of Conjunto in my family like some of our panelists today, but I did grow up in South Texas and love the music, and have, like I said, been very honored to work with so many great Conjunto artists across the state with Texas Folklife and other programs that I've done. And so I'm going to get straight into our discussion today. We're going to touch a little bit on the history of the music for those of you who don't know as much about Conjunto music. And then we're going to just learn about the careers of all our panelists and all that they've done over decades to help preserve the music, and their experiences as performers and promoters and festival producers. So I'm gonna kick it off and introduce our first panelist. We have with us Gilberto Reyes from he is the accordion product manager from KHS America and has worked for years as the Hohner Accordions rep across the world, really, and has been promoting Conjunto music worldwide. He has also founded Reyes Forum in the past and Reyes Accordions, and is a performer himself. So Gilberto, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you to the Texas Folklife for all the things that you guys do in the community, and for also letting us be participants with your Big Squeeze. We're really grateful for that, and we really like what you guys do for the community. Yes, I'm the Hohner Accordion product manager. I've been doing it for some years now. But before I go a little bit into that, I'm originally from South Texas. I was born and raised. I was born in Harlingen, Texas, and basically grew up in Westlaco, Texas. My parents are from General Terán, Nuevo León. So if you guys have ever heard of Los Alegres de Terán, that's where they're from. So I'm pretty familiar, well, growing up with this genre, Conjunto, and the mixture of this style of music that really, I mean, if you look at it, there's really no borders. I mean, people say, well, there's the Mexican and there's the Texas. Well, not really, because if you look at the history, the Conjunto music easily flowed into south of the border, as well as the Mexican music. It was just basically the same thing. Later on, eventually, they started labeling it differently. But anyway, so I've been working with Hohner for some years now, and one of the things for me that's been really important is to focus on the community, because Hohner has been there from the very beginning. I mean, we're talking about as far as Los Alegres de Terán, even further back. But if you see any artists like Los Alegres to Narciso Martinez, Santiago Jimenez Sr., everybody played a Hohner accordion. So it's been a part of the community. So my role, I felt that when I came to the company, was, well, how do we promote not only the music, but our culture, right? Through the instrument. Instrument is an instrument, and it's sort of what connects us with the rest of the world through the interpretation of music, right? So some of the first things that I did was, well, how do we show the world that, you know, this is that you know, the accordion plays a huge role in our community, because we're talking about an accordion brand that's worldwide, right? So one of the first things that I did was the signature series. Nobody had ever done a signature series model. So I thought, well, we got to honor some of our maestros first. So who better than Flaco Jimenez, Esteban Jordan? And the purpose wasn't to make a lot of money, because it wasn't about that. It was really to show the world that we're honoring some Conjunto pioneers, and that this music is viable, right, in the community. And then, of course, we also saw the need to promote kids, because if you look around, there's a lot of kids that are starting to play the accordion. Well, I saw it 10 years ago. My travels, not only in the US, but Mexico, Colombia, little boys and girls very enthusiastic about playing the accordion. So, so my goal has always been to promote kids, students. Girls has been a major one as far as our promotional strategy, if you will, including social media. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of the young ladies from not only the US, but Mexico and all over the world, actually. So that's really what I do. And I think that, you know, I continue to support, you know, organizations like Texas Folklife, Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. And I love the work that, you know, some of the, some people that are doing, like, for example, in South Texas, like Juan Longoria, you know, in the high schools. I mean, there's so much stuff going on. So I think that some people say, well, you know, a lot of young people are not really into this style of music because it's too folkish. I disagree. I think it's there and it's growing, and there's a huge captive young audience. So that's basically what I have to say about me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Those are some really great points that I've myself have been, you know, found important in my career in helping present Conjunto and other genres of accordion music. You know, kind of like your ideas that you brought to Hohner and continue to are sort of like, you could say, taking trends, you know, in rock where they've had like signature guitars and bringing that to the folk genres. And I think that paying homage to the greats and then turning to the younger generations are two very important things in preservation of a music and celebrating culture. I think that's a great segue to our next panelist. I'm just going to let each panelist talk a little bit about their thoughts on Conjunto and what they've been working on, and then we'll get into a more open discussion. You mentioned our next panelist is Juan Longoria Jr. from Brownsville, Texas, and I first met Juan in I think 2007 with he was our first Big Squeeze winner for Texas Folklife, and he has been playing music probably for most of his life, and has his own band, Grupo CONTEÑO, which he can talk about the founding of that group. And now, for several years now, has been the director of the Conjunto program at Los Fresnos High School. So he can speak a lot about the next generation there of Conjunto. Hi, Juan. Thanks for joining us. If you can unmute yourself, Juan. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, let me. Right there?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay. How's it going, guys? Saludos a todos. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I know we worked a lot over the years with Texas Folklife, Rancho Alegre. Actually, I spoke to Gilbert a couple weeks ago on some accordion stuff for the high school. So big shout out to everybody. And well, to touch up on myself, I've been playing, like you said, Sarah, since I was 10. I turned 41 this year, so it's been quite a while playing music. When you guys say Conjunto, and I like what Gilbert mentioned a while ago. He mentioned some points that I agree with a lot, and I'm glad he mentioned it, and I'm pretty sure we're all in that. There's a lot of people in that same boat where, for me, I see the accordion as an instrument. And if you go past, let's say the Narciso, Antonio Tanguma, Alegres, you go back and forth, and you couldn't really distinguish if it was from the Valley, South Texas, San Antonio, Santiago Jimenez, to Mexico. That's just my opinion, right? Till later on, I mean, the rhythms changed a little bit, the tuning on the accordions changed a little bit, and but for me as a musician, as a aficionado, that I love all type of accordion music. I love any type of music, period. But that's what I try to teach to the high school kids. I try to teach them to be open-minded. I've been doing that for the 8 years now. And luckily we started with 13 students in the classroom. It was a project. We wanted to see what if it would take off. And luckily it took off, I think, more than what we were anticipating. And at this point, we got about 100 students, and we have to cap it. I mean, because there's only so much resources we could do, instrumentation, classroom sizes, staff. So it's my coworker and myself that work with the students. And I guess I'll touch up on the generations. Like Gilbert says, before, when I was young, I can honestly say it was more male dominant. You would see a girl or two, and now you should see my beginner class. I got like 38 students, and it's been over the last 4 or 5 years that the beginner class and JV class is almost it's for the most part more girls than boys. I mean, so and that's great. I mean, that's great because it shows a lot of interest. You know, it shows a lot of interest from the young generation. From a personal standpoint, if you ask my students what is conjunto music, they really don't know the difference between. They just like the music because their grandparents heard it, quinceañeras, weddings, cookouts. I mean, they could relate. It's part of our culture. In their mindset, it's, and that's what I try to teach them. Don't get so caught up on it has to be this way. It has to be this way. Just try to enjoy the music, respect it, learn from it, because you learn from anybody. It could be a great musician or talent-wise, or it could be a very simple musician but very humble, and you learn from their humbleness. You learn from their work ethics. So you can learn basically from anybody and respect anybody. That's what I was taught when I was young, and that's what I try to teach to my students. And I see the future of our regional Tex-Mex music growing. I don't know, popularity comes into radio play as well. I mean, that's the way I see it. I mean, if they don't play on the radio, it's not out there for the students. But now, at the same time, at the same token, we got a lot of the social media, a lot of Facebook, YouTube. So I see it growing and in a very positive way. And I wanted to touch up on something else before we move on, but and there's a lot of apps as well. And that's one thing I feel that's helping the generations. They have apps. For example, Horner has their apps, and you could put it on their phones, you could put it on their tablets, you could put it on you name it. There's a lot of YouTube instructional videos. So there's a lot of excessive. If you want to learn, basically, it doesn't have to be young. It could be any age. You could get on social media and you could learn if you really want to learn the instrument. So any instrument, basically, when it comes to our conjunto genre. So I see it positive, and I'm glad this new wave is coming in. So.
Thanks, Juan. I definitely want to circle back later and talk more about your band, which you formed many years ago with your brother, and the blending of genres. But I wanted to take this pause to segue to our next panelist, since you mentioned the role of media in promoting especially folk genres, and there has been a history of radio's promotion of the genre of Conjunto, which I'll let some of our panelists get into here in a minute. But our next panelist, I'm so glad she could join us here from Austin. Nancy is originally, though, from Eagle Pass, another Texas border town, and she has been covering Latino news and culture for the Austin American-Statesmen and Austin 360 since 2011. And she writes the popular monthly column Cultura in Austin, which covers, and she has been very supportive of the Big Squeeze and a lot of the programs that Texas Folklife and our other panelists have been doing in the Austin area and really beyond. So Nancy, thank you so much for your support and for joining us today. And please tell us a little more about yourself and your career and the role of media in music here.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here in this virtual space with everyone. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a journalist with the Austin American-Statesmen. My column, Cultura in Austin, it basically curates cultural events happening locally, just, you know, giving people a glimpse of like what's the best for the next coming month. And to me, this was sort of a labor of love, a project from the heart, because, you know, I pitched it with the idea that the community have a dedicated space to cultural arts. And, you know, in this space, but then also just in my regular reporting of different articles, I have been able to highlight just different Conjunto legends to like the local efforts, you know, such as the Big Squeeze happening statewide, and, you know, of course, the Rancho Alegre Conjunto Festival. And so been really lucky to have the opportunity to showcase, you know, and Austin considers itself the live music capital of the world, that, you know, part of the richness of that music, you know, is Conjunto music. And so being able to include that just in the conversation, I think is, you know, is a big starting point. And, you know, when we talk about just the role of journalism, I mean, I feel when it's, you know, when it comes to Conjunto music, you know, even though I am writing for today's audience, and, you know, I want to inform them and educate them, you know, about what's happening, I also have in mind that these articles, whether it's a profile, an artist interview, that it's also sort of a first draft of history. And I always keep that in mind because there is a lack of documentation of some of Conjunto's history from its early days. And even though we hear about some of the major key players in the genre, there's other untold stories out there. And, you know, I see some of the articles I'm writing today, even though they're, you know, maybe entertaining or, like I say, you know, informing today's audiences, I hope that future generations can look back at some of the archives of the stories that we're producing today and can be able to, you know, that it can inform the future and just kind of where to take the genre, and that people, you know, 5-10 years from now can look back at, well, what was going on with Conjunto during this global pandemic, and that it serves as a, you know, maybe inspiration or launching pad, or maybe just a recognition of the history, you know, that we're writing, you know, as we speak. So, you know, I do keep that in mind, you know, when writing stories about just our roots and our roots music.
Thank you, Nancy. Those were just more great points. You know, I think a lot of times on the end of my end of event production and promoting artists and promoting events, we are reaching out to the media to sometimes even beg you to pick it up, and just so that, I mean, our focus is to get people to the show, most usually, you know, is our number one focus, and to get more awareness of the art musicians. But to see media as recording history is a very important point. And kind of another great segue to our next panelists who have worked hard to record the history of Conjunto across the state. And we have with us here, tuning in from just east of Austin, the founder and executive director and the communications director of Rancho Alegre, a nonprofit formed in 2011, I believe, and works to promote Conjunto and Tejano music. And they have done oral histories across the state and produced the annual Rancho Alegre Conjunto Festival here in Austin. And we have with us here today Baldomero, Cuellar, and Piper LeMoine. Thank you both for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Hey, good to be here.
And thank you for having us.
So yeah, if you can speak to a little bit about why you thought it was important to start a nonprofit, and the work, the programming that you've done to preserve and promote Conjunto music.
Honestly, it was a shameless thing for me to do, because I wasn't impressed with the Conjunto bands that were getting their shots in Austin. It was the same, 3 or 4 bands, maybe one would change every year. And me being, I've traveled to the Valley throughout my life, I knew there was more out there. And like Gilberto was saying, there's youth coming up, a lot of young players. And even Juan said there was a lot of female. I knew there's a lot of female players that needed a shot in Austin that deserve one. And so it was basically, I'm gonna go ahead and on a limb and say it was for my entertainment. I wanted to bring these guys here. I didn't care if anybody showed up. I just wanted to bring them here and expose it. And instead of you have a lot of festivals, and nothing against anybody, but you have a lot of festivals that they bring what they think are the names. Well, since radio dropped off and we lost a lot of the legends, and a lot of the legends have slowed down, there really isn't a lot of names. Every region has their favorites. So we decided not to sell names. We're selling Conjunto. You're going to come get this experience. I was tired of hearing people say that Austin was not a Conjunto town. I was tired of hearing a lot of the young people who said they love Conjunto, not even know who Tony La Rosa was. And I'm a nerd that way, that it just bugs me when I have to sit there and explain who Esteban Jordan was, and why Los Alegres were important to Conjunto, why, it was at one time radio on the same station. You hear Los Tigres, Ramon Ayala, Los Panchos, Los Bukis, Rubén Naranjo, down the line, all together. It was a capirotada. It was a mixture of everything. So that's something that I wanted to bring back, and to educate, always educate, and to go after those albums, because so many masters were lost, we found out. So when you go to a flea market, you go to a garage sale, and you see a classic Conjunto album, that may be the last one that's in good shape. And I don't think people, when we started, realized that, because everyone always assumes the masters are in a good place. We learned that they're not. We have met up with so many owners of the old radio station, or not radio station, record companies, and they have nothing. So it's to me, that just blows my mind, all of those treasures. But that's our mission, to educate, to open up Austin. Flores said, we're the live music capital of the world, and we deserve representation. Not in the corner where the Mexicanos are, not just there, that's fine, but no, smack dab in the middle of it. That was always a goal. Always from the beginning, my target was Waterloo Park, but we ended up at Stubbs, barbecue, which is fine. I'll take it. But we're not in a corner somewhere. We're not in the outskirts. We're right in the middle. So as far as I'm concerned, mission accomplished. And if my partner wants to add to that.
Sure. Yeah, we started actually, as you mentioned with your great introduction, Sarah, with this concept of documenting in the musician's own words. We traveled all over Texas. One day we traveled from San Antonio to Corpus Christi, to Alice, to Laredo, back to San Antonio, and then back home to Austin, doing interviews with all kinds of people, with Renee Joslin, with I don't know, I think we were seeing Alfredo de la Rosa or something that day.
Mingo, I think.
And we saw Mingo. It was crazy that particular day. But that's just an example. We would collect on a road trip. We would collect maybe 4 or 5 people that we were going to go see, and we would record their stories in their own words. And we put that on our website with a collection of their music for people to learn, because as Nancy mentioned, it is seriously underdocumented. There's maybe a handful of books written about it. The one that everyone points to that's kind of the masterwork on it is the Texas Mexican Conjunto by Manuel Peña. But of course, that is also a very scholarly work that is full of footnotes and socioeconomic theory, and there's a good history there, but at the same time, it's not particularly accessible. And also it's out of date at this point, or at that point. And there's a whole new generation of people that you talk to. There were people that weren't included in that. And you can't just have one book as your holy grail for a music genre, right? Particularly in Texas music. And so we felt that also getting their stories in their own words is important for posterity as well. There's a couple other things, not just telling their story, but also in their language as well. We're very lucky that Baldomero here speaks like 3 different flavors of Spanish, and as well as English. I mean, he's fluent in Mexican Spanish, Texas Spanish, Spanglish, and of course English. And he's able to set the subjects at ease, and they just open up to him. And we've been in living rooms and kitchens and patios and everywhere since 2011, and we've got probably about 75 interviews in the can, and we've got to continue publishing those. But that all led to the festival. We created these relationships with people, and we wanted to bring them to Austin because we're like, hey man, they have been lost to time almost. Renee Joslin is a fantastic example.
He's the reason
of
the festival.
And so we built a festival around him because he was afraid that if we brought him to Austin, nobody would know who he was and nobody would show up.
I asked him for just one show. He wouldn't do it. So it kind of pushed my hand to make a festival.
Renee Joslin is an accordionist from Alice, Texas. He's one of the favorite sons of Austin, or of Alice. And so things kind of moved. After that, we become a nonprofit, and we were on the radio for a little bit. We were on co-op radio here in Austin, and we've also started speaking to schools. We speak at a couple of classes at the University of Texas every year. We also have done a couple of presentations at Lee Elementary here in Austin around October, as far as their Latino heritage celebration, and kids learn about culture there. And actually today we just got an offer from an instructor at the University of Nebraska in Omaha who teaches a graduate level course in music pedagogy. And her students are beginning to learn about world music and how to teach it. And these are local teachers in the Nebraska, Iowa region, and we're going to be doing a presentation with them talking about Conjunto music. So we continue to be as as active as we can, and speaking to the younger generation and anybody who wants to learn about this. And of course, we also started our own record label. So we're very grassroots, but we really try our best, and you know, we're in it for the heart. Like you, I didn't grow up with this, and I have had a crash course in Conjunto and Tejano music over the past 9 years. And, you know, there's nothing quite like learning it from the people themselves. And that is a beautiful thing, and I'm forever thankful for it. So, you know, that's what Rancho Alegre is, and we will continue to carry this forward. And we pared down our mission this year to focus on Conjunto music as far as our live events, and most of our efforts, although our documentation efforts will extend to Tejano in the future, because that is also significantly underdocumented as well. So if you put all the books written about Tejano and Conjunto music together, I think you got about 10, maybe. So, and many of those are left over from the golden age of the genre in the 90s, or their doctoral dissertations or master's theses that have been published.
Thank you both. Those were really great points. I've been actually taking notes to circle back on some points. You know, that the historical documentation is a huge part of just any cultural preservation, and even very important to move on with promoting certain music or culture. Including, like you mentioned, even record collection, and seeking out the music seeking out the work of musicians that have passed on already, but also doing the interviews you all have done with especially aging musicians. And you all have an amazing website, which I've actually used several times myself, for the listing you have of Texas Conjunto and Tejano bands. For booking reasons, just to refresh my memory, because you know, when you're just coming up with something new each time, you want to keep mixing it up, and there are hundreds of Conjunto bands. The other thing I wanted to circle back to is the festivals, is the live music part of all of this, and it's, I don't know if there's a ratio like 50-50 of preservation of documentation and then experiencing the music, but to me, and this is why I got into this line of work, is just how good it makes you feel, especially Conjunto music. There's dancing that goes with it. It's not just the instruments, that, you know, putting a certain collection of instruments together that made the music. It is everything. It's a lifestyle. And I wanted to mention a couple of things that have changed because of the current pandemic, because I do want to talk about what's happening currently in the Conjunto music business and how we can all move forward to keep promoting it. But I wanted to give a shout out to Rancho Alegre Festival, which did have to be canceled this year, and I'm sure there will be performances as soon as we can. I'm actually on the stage crew with you all, and have loved being a part of it, especially as it moved to the big stage at Stubbs, and gained an even bigger audience. But I also wanted to give a shout out to the Tejano Conjunto Festival that's been going on for many years in San Antonio, and all of you, Gilberto always had a good presence there with Honer, and of course they've had to postpone they would have been last weekend. So I just wanted to honor all the festivals that have been going on for many years in the state to promote Conjunto, and then kind of also mention the traveling that you all mentioned, because luckily Conjunto has slowly been, you know, leaking out into the other states, and I wanted to circle back to a couple of our panelists who have shared Conjunto specifically outside of the state of Texas. And congrats to you, Frank and Piper, for the University of Nebraska opportunity you just mentioned. But both Gilberto, who travels the world for Honor, and also I want to circle back with Juan Longoria about his travels with his band. I'll kind of open it up, but anyone who wants to speak about traveling around the world and promoting Conjunto outside of the region here in Texas where the music was born, and how you feel about exposing the genre to other regions of the world.
Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about that because I do travel all over the place now, but I see it through a different lens, though. You have to understand that, you know, what I do exposes me to all different genres. And I'm going to be very frank and realistic about, you know, our music, Conjunto. I mean, when I go to places like Maryland, New York, I'm talking here in the States, or even California, and I bring up certain artists, well, they've never heard of them, you know? I could say, you know, Mingo Saldivar. Well, who's that? Or, and I'm talking about not just, you know, non-Latinos, but also, you know, even just Mexicanos who live in the areas, because it's very interesting that the music is heard, because when you play a polka and they'll say, oh, I've heard that, or that's familiar, but yet they don't really understand or know the musicians from Texas because it's very regional, right? And you do have certain families that moved out of Texas, you know, at a certain time to work in the labor camps, if you will, and then they settled in different states like Kansas or Louisiana. And sure, you have those little pockets, but it's not very big. So one of the things that I try to do is, you know, when I talk about, let's say, for example, I'm doing this huge presentation for Sweetwater. Sweetwater is one of the biggest online companies in the country, right? So the way I can promote it is by talking about it, because when the guys from Sweetwater called me, says, you know, we spend thousands of dollars on advertising and platforms and all this stuff for media. And then when I talk to my guys here about accordions, nobody knows nothing about it. They're like dumbfounded about it, right? And I say, well, it's nothing complicated, but this gives me the opportunity to talk about not only the product, but then I start talking about the genres. So I bring up Conjunto and I bring up certain artists with my presentations. For example, I'll bring, you know, some of the pioneers and why this accordion is important to the culture and the community, right? So that's my way of doing it. But the reality, again, is that there's really not a lot of channels out there that's promoting this style of music in different states. What was really interesting, though, is when I went to Colombia, because they play a totally different style of music. But for some reason, they understood a little bit about Conjunto. You know, they brought up certain names like Narciso, and I'm like, wow, they kind of understand. And I think perhaps some communities invest a little bit of time to figure out the culture or the music that, you know, that resonates in certain cultures. So and that's just my perspective. I mean, there's a lot more. I mean, I could talk hours about this subject, but it's just one point of view.
I think that's a great observation. I mean, I haven't traveled half as much as you have, but I think I would be willing to agree that in a region or a culture that already has certain folk genres that they have developed and have been invented in their region, they would maybe seek out other genres, even if they're outside of their own home country. And so that gets to what I wanted to circle back with Juan about is his group blends different styles that were all have been fostered in the Rio Grande Valley area that he was born and raised and lives in. And Juan, could you speak a little bit to your music with Grupo CONTEÑO and just even how you got the band name and the nuances between the genres, and then also touch on the same point of sharing that with people outside of Texas and outside of the Valley? Can you unmute yourself too?
Okay, there we go. Okay, Conteño, our band name, it's really a blend of Conjunto, Tejano, Norteño. And the reason we named it like that was because we played it, like you mentioned, outside of the state of Texas. And it's always, you always get nervous. Even when you go to different parts of Texas or into Mexico, different parts of Mexico, because for the most part, yeah, our music has been played here and there, but you're not going as a headliner. So like anybody, you want to go in there and impress and do the best that you can. And hopefully half of those people like it, because you can't please everybody. It's impossible to please everybody. So there's been times where we're the only ones with cowboy hats, and we're the only ones with when we played in Butte, Montana, for example, in the international festivals. We're the only Latinos. That's the first time I felt really like, okay, we're truly the minority here. But I mean, people embraced it. I loved it because I got to play with other accordionists, that a French accordion player, Cubano, not Cubano, but Zydeco. I got to experience all that, different styles, and we all had that mutual respect towards each other. So it's great to get out of the state. It's nervous, and that's just me trying to entertain a crowd that might, like Gilbert says, they might have never heard certain songs that you play. So getting back to that, the music part of it, why the name, why the style? The style, I honestly think, for many people, and I've been, any criticism is good criticism. That's the way I see it. Okay, I always try to give constructive criticism, but I've had both. I've had some harsh comments, and as a youngster, my dad always told me, you keep it up and you play it because you love playing it, and be yourself. I mean, and that's where we're at right now. To some people, I play tu norteño, the accordion. To some people, I play tu tejano, the accordion. How can I please everybody? It's very hard to do that, especially when you're from Brownsville, Texas, or a border town. You hear Tejano music, you hear Norteño music, you hear your traditional regional conjunto music, you hear tropical, you hear rock, you hear country, you name it, you hear it. So all that stuff, you hear it and it stays. That's basically our soul music. That's the way I see it. I mean, it's like every region has their certain food. You like certain ways. Your tortilla has to be your chile, your salsa, because you grew up on that. So in this case, we grew up in South Texas. We hear all these different styles of music, and I'm proud. I'm proud that I was able to pick up from different artists, kind of try to make it your own at the end of the day. And that's where we're at. That's why Conteño, that's the name. I mean, when you hear our music, a lot of people say, well, I don't know if it's either tu tejano or tu norteño. So I take it as a compliment, because at the end of the day, you respect other artists. I respect, I don't have a favorite accordion player. I have many favorites, but you don't want to sound like them 100%, because at the end of the day, they became iconic because they did their own sound. They did their own style, their own blend of different instrumentations, the way they sang. So that's the way I take music, and I'm glad to represent Conteño across the state. I mean, when we go to anywhere outside the state or within the state, I mean, I'm proud to say, you know what, I'm from Brownsville, Texas, and and I play this type of music. Hopefully you like it. And if you don't, I tried. I tried my best to make it happen for everybody. But I mean, I don't know if you have any other questions on that, but that's why Conteño is Conteño, and it's just a blend of Conjunto, 5-piece band, 4-piece band with the sound of Tejano music and Norteño music blended in there. So.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Thank you for talking more about your group and what your thoughts are on creating your own music and as well as performing traditional music and all the standards of Conjunto. And I think that for those that aren't able to travel in their lives, I mean, even if you're a performing musician and you stay in your region and you're able to collaborate with other styles of music, like you mentioned, those experiences are ways to further the music. And I personally believe that, adding different sounds and can help continue to promote a genre while, just going back to the history and the roots of a music and not completely changing it. There's this kind of like different lines of thought there that I'm sure we've all experienced as to whether folk genres should incorporate more popular sounds or other sounds from around the world. But I think that kind of bounces back to a point that Nancy made earlier. And I wanted to, again, not to be the Debbie Downer, but to point out what we're unable to experience right now with the quarantine and the pandemic is, unfortunately, we can't experience too much live music. The clubs are still closed for the most part, and we can't travel very much. So, back to Nancy's point of the untold stories, I wanted to ask you, Nancy, what you've experienced in being able to share stories and not just, like I said before, of promoting events, which is just not even half of what you do as a journalist. What have you experienced in getting able to tell the stories of Conjunto musicians specifically, but anyone that you've come across, and how that can be shared outside of Austin and with your column and your your writings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important, especially when you're writing for a mainstream audience, that at the end of the day, it's a human story, and being able to make those connections, it's what being able to get to the heart of why a musician does what he does, or that's the stuff that's going to connect like a wider audience, even if they don't understand Conjunto or Tejano. Being able to bring to audiences, I'm thinking of Tejano because that's we just had the anniversary of Selena's death, and there was a particular story that really connected with audiences, beyond people familiar with the genre, on like Little Joe y La Familia that I wrote about, like a cover of an album that he had called Las Viejas, or like his hits, the oldies, that featured women in, I believe, in the 70s who went to a concert and were photographed and, became, just these cover girls all of a sudden. And, the album went totally, up in sales. Of course, these all were young, beautiful women who were there just at a dance. And, just in telling that story, I think, it became more than just a music story or just a story about one artist. It was really about about community and and those ties, and just the response from different audiences and even people who not familiar with the music, we're still able to connect at the end with, you know, the sort of the excitement of getting ready for like a teen dance, or like the nervousness of seeing your crush at a, you know, at an event, and, you know, the exciting part of, you know, seeing your favorite artists. And so, you know, all of those little things I think are, you know, helpful, and, you know, in sort of reeling the audience into, you know, more of a people stories.
Thank you. That's really how you get to know a tradition like Conjunto is more than just, I mean, for those that have never heard the music, you would probably start by hearing, you know, a recorded piece, but being able to read stories like you share, and hearing things on the radio is really important, especially right now. Like I mentioned, you know, maybe some people are scared to look at the news, but there are a lot of news outlets that are still sharing stories such as yours, and the radio stations are still active and trying to, you know, dig through their collections like they always have. And I wanted to go back to Frank and Piper about radio, because that's another big part of the history of Conjunto and Tejano music, is radio's role. And you all had a radio, you had your own radio show for a while, but you just also, I'm sure you have a great collection yourself, but you're constantly sharing, you know, like Nancy mentioned the cover of a certain thing, like digging into that, and you just found ways to share other pieces of information about older recordings, and digging in through your oral histories. So I wondered if you had anything to share about radio's role in Conjunto, and even what you would hope for the future to keep supporting the genre.
Love to. I would first like to say to Juan's point of his style of music, and I compare Juan's music to Los Arcos Hermanos Peña that came out of Bego. That was Los Relámpagos, norteño sounding, but adapted to Conjunto back then. And that was the foundation where it all grew, you know, along with everyone else having their input in there. And the thing is that I think it's very important that survived too. And Juan, they're doing a great job of it. There are a lot of bands. Ricky Ruiz is carrying that, where they don't know if it's más norteño or Conjunto. It all plays. So hats off to you, Juan. You're doing a great job, man. Síguele. As far as radio, it was an honor to get on the airwaves, to educate people in a mass, you know, audience, as much as their antenna could reach. The problem is that you have to be careful, because you'll have people that want you there, but you've got to watch the reasons. Is the reason because they want to be able to say, look, we do Mexican music, leave us alone, quit calling? Or is it because we really want you to educate, you know, about this music? So my dream is that someone would contact us, or you know, we could, you know, meet someone that is about our role, which we've always said our role is like a PBS of Conjunto. We're not really out to capitalize really on anything. We just want to spread the gospel and the history of it. So that's where I'm at. I mean, it was an honor to, you know, I was glad, you know, that we were given the opportunity, but you just gotta be careful, because we've been contacted by others that were just interested in getting copies of our catalog so that they could do whatever they wanted to do. And I would be fine with that if that's how they came at us with it. we're not about selling the old catalog. We're not about, we'll give you a copy of what you need, but just be upfront with us. Don't string us along. I think we've been around long enough to where you cannot hold a cherry in front of us saying, we'll get you on the air. And I'm like, good, but what can we do? Are we going to be able to keep on with our mission, or what do you want us to do? So that's my feeling on it. Like I said, it was an honor, but you just got to be careful.
Well, I would say that, to my knowledge, there's really only one station that focuses mostly on Conjunto, KEDA in San Antonio. Just about everybody else, they'll dedicate an hour or two here, or a Saturday morning, or some other time where they focus on Conjunto, where they think that particular audience is going to be listening, and that's fine. And then the rest of the time they play Tejano, or it's mostly Tejano. So KDA has been doing that for, I think, 50 something years, 53, 54, something like that. And they continue to be kind of the standard bearer of Conjunto radio. And I have to give them a lot of credit for that, because I mean, that's a long time to continue with a genre that hasn't been particularly commercially successful. Something that I always say is that, here's an example. Gilberto Reyes has about 75 albums, 80 maybe. Yeah. He forgets how many he has, and that's not uncommon amongst somebody with 60 years in the business. And the thing is that even though he was very popular in different areas of the country and was touring in the 60s and 70s, and what I'm getting at is that even though they didn't have the tour buses, they didn't have the corporate sponsors, the Coca-Cola, the huge star success that Tejano enjoyed in the 90s, Conjunto continued to record music, and they never stopped making records. And that's one of the things that draws me, that really endears Conjunto to me, and draws me to it, is there's so much heart, and it's such an expression of themselves, of their communities, and it's just something to admire. And that's one of the reasons why I love it, and that's one of the reasons why I can't say enough great things about it. If you start me talking, if you wind me up in front of somebody that doesn't know anything about Conjunto music, I will talk ad nauseum about it, and all the different types. And so you gotta set aside some time for me. But that's the credit that I would give in terms of the status of media and Conjunto music. I gotta give hats off to KDA.
Thank you. Yeah, I know, I mean, again, we could get into so much of the history from the beginning to now of Conjunto music. But one point I wanted to kind of start to wrap up, and with my closing question that I'd like you all to touch on is just your vision for what you see coming for the future of Conjunto. And I wanted to start with something that you all mentioned earlier. And actually it comes from something Frank just mentioned, of the want to promote this music, to promote Conjunto as much as we all can, but also to protect the artists, because they have been taken, a lot of folk genres, unfortunately it's a trend in this country, but have been taken advantage of, and you want your music to be shared, but you don't have lawyers in line to protect you. And so with that in mind, I wanted to circle back to something you all touched on earlier, which is the gender diversity that's been increasing in Conjunto music. And I actually noticed this year with the Big Squeeze that there was 33% of the Conjunto applicants were female. And that points back to, again, you all touched on this, but Juan's point about his own Conjunto program at Los Fresnos is over 50% in the beginners, which is the most important to get the youngest people to understand that anybody can pick up the accordion and learn conjunto. And so I see that as a very positive sign for the future of conjunto music, that there are increasing numbers of females picking up the music and leading bands, because we all need role models, and we all want to see something we feel comfortable with if we are introduced to a music. And so that's just something I wanted to point out for the future of the music. You know, you all have been very supportive of the Big Squeeze, and I'm so honored to have worked with Texas Folklife since the beginning of that program. And I know that Conjunto is got a positive, you know, outlook for continuing with how many young people I see playing the music. But I wanted you all, as we kind of wrap up here, to speak to anything you want to share about how to keep Conjunto alive and thriving and share it with the world and the future of the music.
Okay, I could start. You know, it was about 12, 13 years ago. I had seen, I was at a place, I don't want to say where, but location. I was traveling on business, and incredible young girl. She must have been like 6 or 7 years old, and she was playing incredibly. I mean, she blew me away. I just couldn't believe how good she could play. And I told the father, I said, man, I mean, you must be really proud of your daughter, man. Look at what she can do at such a young age. And he looks at me and he goes, well, yeah, but she's a girl. That's what he said to me. I'm like, whoa. So that sort of kind of got me into promoting women. So one of the things that I did in the very beginning, this was about 8, 9 years ago, I thought, well, I got to find female artists, you know, because it's important. I mean, if you look at Conjunto, very few. Any genre, regional Mexican, very few. So I started looking for female artists, and even though they weren't famous, but they had, you know, some kind of yeah, they had a band. They would do, you know, minor tours here and there. But and one of the things that I told them before I made them endorsees, I said, you have a very responsible role, that you're going to be role models, basically. I mean, and they didn't get it in the beginning, but then I don't know if you've, obviously we talked about it earlier. You've seen such a huge increase in female participation, you know, from all ages. It's just incredible. I just wanted to talk about that really quick and how important that is, but also what Piper was talking about earlier, how about commercialization, and you talk about, well, how do we continue to promote Conjunto? Well, it's really tough, because I think, like you said earlier, it's really tough because when you talk about folk music, be it Cajun, be it whatever, Irish, they all have the same problem. It's not commercial music, and it doesn't get any airplay, and it's not going to do it, you know, because let's face it, regional Mexican is, and that's what people are putting money into it. So the question is, so then what do we do to preserve Conjunto, and what's going to be the amplification of how to get it out into the world, even though we know we don't have the sponsorships, we don't have the radio stations, we don't have all these things, right? Obviously you guys are doing it, but is it enough? And if it's not enough, well, then maybe is it the next generation, like the girls that we talked about, or the little boys that are going to take it out? Who knows? I'm just kind of thinking out loud, if you will.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna jump in. I know we're kind of going out of order. Is this just like a free for all at this point?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Please just share.
Well, to continue that, we had a project. I touched on this briefly, and we had a project earlier this year where we started a Rancho Alegre Records. It's been kind of, we talked about it for a while, but to talk about different audiences and also talking about promoting women, we actually recorded. We produced a vinyl album. This is Brenda Martinez. She's from San Antonio, Texas. This is an album entirely of polkas, plus a huapango and a bolero. It's entirely instrumental. There's no singing. It's just her on accordion, and of course, with the traditional conjunto backing of bajo sexto, bass, and drums. And so we just, when we were thinking about this, and we were talking to Brenda, we wanted to do something. It's called Favoritos de mis Padres, and it's dedicated to her parents. And these are songs that are really important to them. And we were talking about how to produce a record like this and how to reach it. And as you know, vinyl has been outselling CDs for the past 2 or 3 years. I think that last year it finally went on top. And so we decided that let's just do a vinyl conjunto album. And so that would be unique in and of itself. A woman hasn't done an accordion or a conjunto album all by herself in a very long time. And I can't remember the last time a female accordion player has done an entirely instrumental album. So this was entirely unique. We were trying to reach to several different audiences, traditional conjunto fans. One of the things that we learned as we were putting this out in record shops was we talked to Robert at Janie's record shop in San Antonio. It's very popular to get an album of polkas and something that's entirely instrumental. So that kind of was reassuring as we were putting it out there. And we wanted to reach vinyl collectors, and these collectors are the same ones who are preserving the same recordings we were talking about at the very beginning of this. The last time somebody did a vinyl conjunto record was probably in the 80s, and that didn't make the leap from vinyl to cassette, and definitely not to CD, and definitely not to Spotify. So we were really reaching out to that vinyl crowd as well, and of course we put it on Spotify and Tidal and all the digital outlets. So we really tried a new kind of approach, I guess you could say. It was the brainchild of Mr. Cuellar here, and he picked all the songs, and we recorded it with Escalante Music in San Antonio, and Oscar Garcia was the backing band. he played bajo sexto, bass, and drums on that, and Brenda was on the accordion. So, but it's a woman front and center, multiple audiences, and we're really proud of this project, and we hope to see more of this out there.
To Gilbert's point of what can we do, of course, none of us can really do everything, but anyone that knows me knows that I shoot for the stars. And part of becoming a nonprofit was, us applying for a nonprofit radio station of our own, dedicated to conjunto and folk music, that type. But even now that I'm facing what I'm facing next month, we have an extra house on our property that we're remodeling, and we have plans to put a recording studio, but we want an analog recording studio. And because there's a lot of times that we travel through Texas, and like Gilberto said, he'll find someone that's awesome that should be recording. So we're trying to make it a nonprofit recording studio. Even if we find a band that only stays together long enough to do one recording, that's still worth its weight in gold to me, to document it, to have something of it. And at the same time, my goals are to show them the business, show them about publishing, why they need to publish their own music, why they need to save that for the rainy day. Like you said, we've seen so many artists that pass on penniless.
Yeah. And at our festival, we have, and you know this very well, Sarah, we have representatives from other organizations. We've recruited information from the Grammys, information from TuneCore, also the Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. We try to educate them and try to get them as business savvy as we can. And on a personal level, and both of us have advised artists about how to put their music on Spotify, do it themselves, we really try to pass that information on to encourage them to be as professional and as cautious as they can. So we really, really try to look for the future and look out for these people, and we want them to continue making music, and we want them to continue getting the credit for it, honestly. And they're either from way back, if they wrote the original and somebody's recorded it, 5 or 6 bands have recorded it, now somebody's gonna made a hit of it. We want the people that are listening to the hit to know who did the original. So we really try to do that.
Thank you. Exciting things on the horizon for Rancho Alegre, as always. Nancy, do you want to share your thoughts on the future of Conjunto?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about just, the role of media earlier, and, I did want to bring up, some of the challenges, and I'm talking mainly on the newspaper, magazine, online side of it. And, as media has been disrupted in the past several years, there has been it's no secret that there is a lack of representation, Latino representation in media, among journalists. And so, when I look into the future, it's that, also being supportive of, the journalists of color who can bring some of these stories to life with like a cultural, competency, is important. And a lot of times, as newsrooms, are slashing budgets and things like that, some of the first things to go are, resources for music, for the arts coverage. And so, I think as readers or just music lovers, that it's important also to voice that is still, that culture is not expendable, and that is still important to the community. And so, looking to the future, I do think, especially now as we're going through, this COVID-19, pandemic, that, that conjunto music and other types of music can be healing, can be inspiring during this time. And we still need those stories. So letting your, local newspapers, radio stations, know that you're still interested in that coverage, I think will help a lot in just generating, more stories in the future, and making sure that those areas, are not cut, as we move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important. For me personally, art is what has given me the most joy in my life, and to see that artists are continuing to put out new music and are doing streaming events and concerts online is just great, and shows the perseverance of all of us and all of the artists out there. Juan, what would you like to share about the work you do as an educator and a performer in the future?
Well, as an educator, I think the future is bright. As a performer, I know for a fact it's extremely hard to live off of music, and especially we've tried it. I mean, and I tell my son, I tell the students, I think music's a drug. Honestly, I think, especially right now that we can't perform, it's not for the money. Honestly, we're not going to get rich off. I know I'm not going to get rich off of it unless I have this mega hit and I cross borders all over. But I do it because I love it. But we haven't played for 2 months, literally. So all the gigs that we had got postponed for next year or got canceled. So it's something that you got to deal with. I mean, you're used to playing every other weekend or weekend, and it messes with your system as a performer, I think. But getting back to the future, I mean, I'm hoping and praying there's a young, charismatic band, regardless if it's female or male or both, that could have a good new sound. Because I think that's what we need, a new sound with a good bang where it could catch a promoter's attention, a company, somebody that's going to put them out there where it's going to become trendy again. Because that's the key thing I think right now. It's not trendy enough, it's not popular enough for the young generation just to grasp and want to sound like that. So I'm hoping, and music, in my opinion, is a cycle. Every 5 years, every 4 years, there's a new hit, new style, and then it comes again. But the beauty of Conjunto music, it's never died. Honestly, I mean, it's never died, and I don't think it will, because it's so close to, it's in our DNA, literally. We're born into it, regardless of what region you're from, if either you're in northern Mexico, whatever region in Texas or outside. Like Gilbert said, some people move on because of work reasons back in the day, but it's in their heart, I mean, and they push it. So I think it's bright. I don't know to what, if it's going to be as popular as it used to. I'm hoping it does, and I'm hoping there's going to be a young 2 or 3 bands that just make that new movement towards this, to our music, you know. And if I could live off of it, trust me, I would. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of musicians that would love to live off of music, but unfortunately, it's just hard. It's bills don't stop. Your electricity, your mortgage, all that stuff doesn't. Plus, back then, if you wrote a song, there was a lot of royalties. Nowadays, people don't want to purchase a whole CD. They don't want to. They want to download everything for free. Literally, they don't want to pay. So times have changed, and I see it. I see it firsthand, because none of my students have a CD. They don't even have a complete album at times. They just go to either all the digital platforms and they get the song they want. So it changes. I'm a little old school at times, but the music in itself, conjunto music, tejano, norteño, whatever involves with a vowel sex and accordion, literally, and bass and drums, I think it's strong. I think it's bright, and there should be a bright future with all this new generation coming up. All this, like I said earlier, I mean, Horner, you have no idea how many kids have your app. I mean, and they have it on their phones, they have it on tablets. I mean, they might not be able to purchase an accordion yet, but they have it, and so there's no limitations for people to learn their instrumentation now. So, I mean, I think it's good. It's looking good. I hope and pray that there's some charismatic new vocalist, accordionist that's gonna blow everybody out, and it'll become a new trend again. So that's just my hopeful. I'm being hopeful on that.
Thank you so much, Juan. I don't want to keep you all any longer, but I just wanted to say, to close up, to anyone that's watching, please do support the musicians of Conjunto and all traditional music. You know, we mentioned Austin being deemed the live music capital of the world, but it wouldn't be that without the musicians. So please do what you can to, if you have any means, to help musicians right now in this time while they can't gig. Please watch their shows and give them tips, and do go out and pay cover charge when we are able to go back to venues and listen to their music. And to the young people, you know, I've heard too, through the Big Squeeze, a lot of young people are learning. I don't know how they do it, but they're learning instruments on YouTube, especially accordion, which I think is so difficult. But I would encourage young people and people of all ages to seek out an instructor, especially right now. Musicians that are out of work and not able to gig can give their expertise by giving online classes. So I would just encourage anyone listening to our panel discussion today to support musicians directly in that way. And so I'd like to just go through one last time and say thank you to each one of our panelists, and know that there's many more people that can speak to Conjunto music, and there's a lot of organizations around the state. Juan is a director of a high school program in Los Fresnos, but there's a big history of Conjunto programs in the high schools in the Valley that I always want people to know about. So please look out for those schools in the Valley that have Conjunto programs. Also Conjunto Heritage Taller in San Antonio is a great organization, and all of the festivals and everyone we mentioned. And thank you again, Gilberto Reyes from Honer. Thank you so much for your years of support of Texas Folklife and Conjunto music, sharing it worldwide. Thank you for being here today. And Juan Longoria Jr., thank you for your years of sharing your music and friendship through Texas Folklife. And you all can look for his band CONTEÑO is online on Facebook and everything, and the Los Fresnos Conjunto program, Los Halcones, Conjunto Halcón, and Nancy Flores, thank you so much. Thank you for your support of everything that we all do. It means a lot to us to have journalistic support and for people to read through the Austin American-Statesmen and through your column, stories of Conjunto music. And last but not least, Baldomero and Piper from Rancho Alegre, thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to the next edition of the festival and everything that you all have going on. So thank you again.
Sarah, may I say one last thing?
Of course, yes.
On this COVID-19, I think you tried to ask about that. I promise you, no matter what happens, we're gonna dance again. People will always want to dance, and we're gonna do it safely, responsibly. And another thing, we gotta look at the bright side of things. That's the way I am. Maybe this being grounded will keep people from bitching about a cover charge. Because we hear that all the time. I mean, how dare you charge? Juan was saying, how dare you charge for music? You know what? This is a lesson. You want to have a good time, you got to pay the band. That's my 2 cents. But thank you all, guys.
Agreed, and thank you for sharing all of your expertise tonight, and thank you for the years that you all have put into promoting Conjunto music, and I know we all share the love of this music, and yes, please stay well, and definitely we will celebrate in person again soon, and meanwhile we'll stay on this virtual platforms. So thank you so much from Texas Folklife. Thanks for joining us on this panel discussion here today about the future of Conjunto music. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Adios.